Assets, something of either tangible or intangible value that is worth protecting. It includes people, information, infrastructure, finance, and reputation. I remember an incident in 2017. It was a big incident. There was a data center outage of one company, and there was a 200 million pounds loss. They've incurred a loss of 200 million pounds. 100 million pounds was a direct loss they faced because of cancellation of tickets, flights, etc. And another 100 million pounds was an indirect loss on reputation and brand. So assets could be anything, including people, processes, infrastructure, finance, or even reputation. Then you have a vulnerability. Vulnerability is weakness in a countermeasure that is in place. It's a lack of countermeasure or a weakness in a countermeasure that is in place. For example, in a system, antivirus is not updated. That is a vulnerability. A port is opened on a firewall which is not supposed to be opened. That is a vulnerability. A rule is missing on a firewall. That is a vulnerability. Lot my times, software developers, they write commits because software developers, they work in coordination with each other. They suppose there's a group of 5 software developers who are working on one application. So while writing software, while developing software, they do write comments so that their fellow programmer, if he's not available, can find it out that what is the reason of writing this code. Under ideal condition, they should do a sanitization once the software is complete, and before moving to production, they should remove all those comments. If a software developer is forgets to delete those comments, so those bit comments can be used by a hacker to get useful information from it. So that is also what a vulnerability. Any weakness in a system which gives an attacker an opportunity to attack a system is called a vulnerability. Then you have a threat and threat agents. Lot my times people get confused between threat and threat agent. So there is a difference in between two. Okay, so what is threat? Continue with my previous example, antivirus is not updated. This is what a vulnerability. In how many different ways this vulnerability, antivirus is not updated, can be exploited? It can be used by a hacker. It can be exploited by a hacker to exploit a system or penetrate into a system, or it can be used by a virus or a worm to infect your system. So what are those? These two potential dangers are called threats. Threat is any potential danger which is associated with exploitation of vulnerability. I live in Delhi. Delhi is densely populated and hugely populated city. So this dense population and large population, I would say, is a vulnerability. In how many different ways this vulnerability can be exploited? There could be terrorist attack, there could be pandemic, there could be flood, there could be an earthquake. So what are these? These are potential dangers which can exploit a vulnerability dense population. Then out of these multiple or probable dangers, one has identified that yes, one has exploited the dense population in reality, that is pandemic. The pandemic would be threat agent. So threat means multiple probable danger, and threat agent means out of that multiple probable danger, one has exploited the vulnerability in reality. So that is, I would call, the threat agent. Another example, same example, antivirus is not updated. What are the two potential probable dangers or threats? Hacker and virus. Out of these two, virus has identified that there is a missing signature, and virus has exploited that missing signature vulnerability to and penetrate or infect your system. In that case, virus will be threat agent. Another example, suppose if you get your health checkup done, although a weird example, but yes, we all sit in AC offices. If you get your health checkup done, you will find most of us will have deficiency of, most of IT people will have deficiency of vitamin D. So deficiency of vitamin D is a vulnerability. What are the potential dangers? Means threat. In how many different ways it can be exploited? So that would be threat. Like ricket virus, arthritis, liver problem, health problem, and your bone started getting weaker. What is that? Different potential dangers, threat. Out of these 5 potential dangers that is threat, Ricket virus has identified that yes, your body has that person's body has a deficiency of vitamin D, and it has now that person is infected with Ricket. Ricket is what? A threat agent. Is it clear the relationship between vulnerability, threat, and threat agent? Risk, it is the likelihood of a threat agent exploiting the vulnerability and its corresponding business impact. Risk is always calculated as a product of probability of occurrence and its corresponding business impact. It is a product of probability of occurrence of threat agent exploiting the vulnerability and its impact. So it is a combination of two things. First one is likelihood of an occurrence or frequency, that what is a frequency or likelihood that this threat agent will exploit a vulnerability. If it exploits a vulnerability, then what would be an impact? So it requires a combination of these two things, threat agent likelihood or frequency and its corresponding business impact. I remember I was a part of one team in 2008 in HCL. We encountered one virus outbreak. Every day we used to get hundreds of incidents in which user systems were infected. The incident priority was not very high, although the likelihood or frequency of a threat agent exploiting vulnerability was very high. But those threat agents, that is virus, were only impacting the user, were only infecting the user system, which was lowering the impact. One day, the EPU server, McAfee EPU server, which was responsible for maintaining or providing security to the whole infrastructure of Excite company, that got infected. So although frequency was very high from the beginning, but that day, that system, its impact was also very high. So that automatically elevates the risk to high. Risk is being calculated as a product of likelihood or frequency of threat agent exploiting the vulnerability. And if threat agent exploits a vulnerability, what would be an impact? So there are two things required to make a risk: the likelihood of the threat agent, likelihood of exploiting the vulnerability, and if that day, and then if it exploits the vulnerability, what would be an impact? Here, there will be a separate topic in detail about the risk management. We have a separate topic in this domain itself. But for the time being, it is clear what is risk. Then you have a control or countermeasure. The controls, whole your security revolves around controls only. The controls or countermeasures are countermeasures are the things that you put into place in order to reduce the risk. Always remember, from examination perspective also, risk cannot be eliminated completely. It will be reduced to a certain extent. So that is the thing that you need to remember. If some question asks you about, if some question asks about the risk elimination, always remember risk cannot be eliminated completely. It will be reduced to a certain extent. So whatever controls or countermeasure that you implement in organization, it is all for a reduction of a risk to a certain extent. And that is the thing that you need to remember.